Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are tackling a question that sounds so incredibly simple, but trust me, it's one of the most fascinating and complex rabbit holes in the entire legal world. Legally speaking, what are you?
Okay, let's just jump right in. Let's make this personal. Forget philosophy, forget biology for a second. According to the law, when did you, as a legal person, actually begin? Was it at conception? Was it the exact moment you were born? Or, and get this, was it maybe even a full day after you were born? The answer is way more specific and honestly way more surprising than you probably think.
So to figure this all out, here's our game plan. We're going to follow the entire legal life cycle of a person. First, we'll break down the law's basic definition of a self. Then, we'll pinpoint the exact moments of legal birth and death. After that, we'll get into who and sometimes what can actually act legally. We'll even look at the surprisingly deep law behind your own name. And finally, we'll see what happens when these different legal worlds smash into each other.
All right, let's kick things off with the absolute foundation, the law's definition of you. And the best way to understand it is to think of yourself as having two distinct legal halves.
Okay, so this is the crucial idea. The law basically splits you in two. On one side, you have what's called juridical capacity. This is just your basic ability to have rights, the right to own things, the right to inherit stuff. It's something you have from the moment of legal birth all the way to your death. The easiest way to think about it, you're a character in a video game. You exist in the game world. But on the other side, you have the capacity to act. This is the power to actually use those rights, to sign a contract, to sue someone, to sell that property you own. This is like having the controller to actually play the game. And here's the key difference. Unlike juridical capacity, you aren't born with this, and it can be limited or even taken away because of things like your age or your mental state.
So, if we've got our character in the game, when does the law say that game officially begins, and when is it game over? That brings us to the bookends of your legal personality: birth and death.
The law is incredibly, almost surgically precise about this. For a fetus to be considered legally born and get that legal personality, a few things have to happen. Step 1, there has to be complete delivery from the mother's womb. Step 2, the baby has to be alive at that moment. But here's the real kicker, the big exception. If the intrauterine life was less than 7 months, the law adds a third, critical step. That child has to survive for a full 24 hours after being delivered. One single day can change everything in the eyes of the law.
Now, this strict definition brings up a really tough, very human question. If an unborn child doesn't technically have a legal personality yet, does that mean they're just nothing to the law? Think about a tragic situation where an employee's wife has a miscarriage. Should that employee be able to claim bereavement benefits for a child who was never, by that strict definition, legally born? Well, this exact question made it all the way to the Supreme Court. And this is a perfect example of how the law can show its human side. In this 2009 case, Continental Steel, the Supreme Court decided to look past the cold, technical definition of personality. They asked, what's the purpose of the benefit? And as the court put it so powerfully, the whole point is to assuage the grief of the parents. And that grief, they argued, is just as real for an unborn child. So, they ruled for the employee, choosing to focus on the human reality of the loss.
Now let's flip to the other bookend, death. What happens when someone just vanishes? I mean, the law can't just wait forever, so it created these timelines for what's called presumptive death. If it's an extraordinary situation like a shipwreck or a soldier missing in a war, the clock is just 4 years. For a regular, ordinary absence, you're presumed dead for most things after 7 years. But, and this is a really important distinction, if you're trying to inherit their property, what the law calls opening succession, you have to wait a full 10 years.
Okay, so that seems pretty straightforward, right? Let's say a soldier has been missing for over a decade. His spouse needs to claim death benefits. She can just go to court, show he's been gone for the right amount of time, and get a judge to declare him presumptively dead. Simple enough, right?
Well, not so fast. In a really surprising 2018 ruling called Tadeo Matias, the Supreme Court said you actually can't do that. You can't file a lawsuit for the sole purpose of having someone declared presumptively dead. The court explained that these timelines, they aren't a standalone reason to sue. They're a rule of evidence you use inside another case. So an agency that pays out benefits can look at your evidence and make a decision. You don't need a separate court order for it, unless it's for the very specific purpose of getting remarried. And if you thought that was a bit of a twist, buckle up. This brings us to an even stranger part of the law. Who can actually act legally? This is where we learn the really important difference between legal persons and actual people.
All right, so we've established that a living person is, well, a person. But what happens after they die? Can their estate, the collection of all their property and their debts, can it actually take on a life of its own? Could it even have citizenship and keep fighting a legal battle that was already started?
This is where the law gets really creative. It uses this amazing tool called a legal fiction. Back in 1948, in the Lim Joko case, the Supreme Court said, yes, it can. To make sure things are fair, the law basically pretends that the personality and even the citizenship of the person who died extends to their estate. This lets the estate act like an artificial person to finish what the deceased started, all for the benefit of their heirs. Okay, so if the law can make a person out of a dead man's property, then it seems obvious that a group of actual living, breathing people, like, say, an association of flood victims who want to sue the government, they should be able to join together and sue as one group, right? I mean, that just makes sense. And here's the legal twist you didn't see coming. In a 2014 case, the Supreme Court said no. An unincorporated association, that is, a group that hasn't gone through the official legal paperwork to become a corporation or something similar, it doesn't have its own separate legal identity. To the law, it's just a bunch of individuals, so it can't sue in the association's name. Think about that paradox for a second. A dead person's estate can be a legal person, but a living group of people might not be? All this talk about legal identity brings us to something that's deeply personal for every single one of us. The law of your name. For decades, the law had really specific rules about last names. Article 364 of the Civil Code was always read to mean that a legitimate child had to use their father's surname. But the law uses one very specific word. It says a child shall principally use the father's surname. But what does principally really mean? Does it mean always? Does it mean exclusively?
This is a fantastic look at how our understanding of the law can grow and change. In the landmark Alanis III decision from 2020, the Supreme Court took a fresh look at that one little word, and they declared that principally does not mean exclusively. The court argued that forcing a child to use only the father's surname basically makes the mother's entire family history invisible, and that goes directly against the constitutional promise of gender equality. It was a huge deal. So today, a legitimate child has the right to choose to use the surname of either their father or their mother.
All right, for our final section, we're going into some deep legal territory to see what happens when these different legal worlds collide. We're going to talk about a concept called the prejudicial question. It sounds complicated, but stick with me. It's all about keeping court decisions from contradicting each other.
So what on earth is a prejudicial question? Put simply, it's an issue that comes up in a civil lawsuit, but its answer is so important that it directly decides if a related criminal case can even move forward. It's like a legal domino. If the civil court rules one way, it might make it totally impossible to prove the criminal charge.
The best way to see this in action is to compare two real cases. In the Common Forte case, some people were criminally charged with forging signatures on property deeds. At the same time, a civil court made a final ruling that those exact same signatures were genuine. The Supreme Court said, that's a prejudicial question. Since one court already decided the signatures were real, you can't have a criminal trial for forgery. The criminal case got dismissed. But now look at DreamWork. Someone was charged criminally for writing a bounced check. They then filed a civil case to cancel the contract that the check was for. Here, the court said that is not a prejudicial question. Why? Because the crime is the act of writing a bad check itself. It doesn't matter what happens to the contract later. You still wrote a worthless check. So the criminal case moves forward. The whole thing hinges on whether that civil ruling is a total deal breaker for the criminal case.
So, as we've seen, the law's definition of a person isn't some fixed ancient rule. It's this complex, living thing woven from biology, creative legal fictions, and our own changing social values. And that leaves us with a huge forward-looking question. As our world changes and technology creates brand new things like artificial intelligence or these decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs, what new kinds of persons will the law have to recognize next? The very definition of you, legally speaking, is a story that is still being written.